Today's show examines another critical aspect of the Right to Life movement, the effectiveness of right to life legislation. Some historical perspective is first needed to understand why this legislation is needed at all. Judicial activism in the court decisions of Roe v. Wade and Doe v. Bolton in the 1970s has resulted in the deaths of more than 44 million Americans who never had a chance to take a single breath of life outside the womb. With lifetime appointment of judges in higher courts in America and Massachusetts, one can reasonably conclude that judicial activism obviously has an enormous downside. With little recourse other than lengthy and difficult process of impeachment of judges, pro-lifers have turned to state legislatures attempting to stem the avalanche of abortions in both Massachusetts and the United States. Today's show asks, is pro-life legislation effective? With abortions reflecting a downward trend in recent years, what is the reason for the decline? Is it just a matter of aging baby boomers? Is it the informed consent laws now on the books in some states? Is it the banning or restricting of partial birth abortions in some states? And what about parental involvement laws in some states? Has a woman's right to know legislation had an impact? We have that bill in the legislature right now. How about some recent restrictions on your tax dollars, which, through the Medicaid program, pay for many abortions? Is the abortion-on-demand sentiment ballyhooed by the mainstream media outlets waning? Our guest today has studied and written about these very issues. He grew up in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area. He attended and graduated from Dartmouth College. He has a doctorate degree from Stanford University. First, he got a master's degree in statistics and then a PhD in political science. Currently, he's a postdoctoral fellow at the Harvard MIT Data Center. He recently researched these issues. Both the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C., and the opinion magazine National Review published his findings. Today's show discusses his findings. I confidently believe you'll find today's show to be unique, informative, content-rich, truthful, and thought-provoking. Welcome, Dr. Michael Mill.
Thanks, Brendan.
Before we get started, I'd just like to mention the call-in phone number. Should our viewing audience have any questions for our guest about the effects of pro-life legislation. The number is 617-973-4848. Dr. New, how did you get involved in the Right to Life movement?
Sure. There are a few different reasons why I got involved. I went to a very traditional Catholic high school in the city of Pittsburgh, and I had many teachers there who were very pro-life. And when I was in high school, I was very busy. I spent a lot of time concerning myself with trying to get into a good school. I was involved with many extracurriculars, and it really was never a big priority for me. And then I arrived at Dartmouth College, and when I arrived at Dartmouth, I was kind of surprised by a lot of what I saw there. And it just seemed that early in my career, the places where I sort of felt I fit in the best and had the best time were sort of conservative political groups and Catholic student groups on campus. And that sort of helped me take me down that road. And then I remember just one day my sophomore year, I was singing at Mass, and I really don't even remember what the sermon was about, but it just hit me like a ton of bricks. This is an issue that's very important and an issue I should involve myself with. So a few days later, I spoke with a priest on campus about forming a pro-life group, but he told me that another student was already in the process of doing so, and I contacted that student, joined the group, and never looked back.
Now, what year was this that you were in at Dartmouth?
I started Dartmouth in 1993 and joined the pro-life group probably, I guess it was fall of 1994.
1994? I see. Okay. And how did you come to write a paper entitled Analyzing the Effects of State Legislation on the Incidence of Abortion During the 1990s?
That's a good question. I mean, one of the things about the pro-life movement is we spend a lot of time trying to convince others of the rightness of our ideas. But I think we need to start thinking a little more critically about strategy. In the state level, you've had different states try some different strategies to protect the unborn, and you have 50 different states. And I thought I could look at some of the relevant data and determine sort of what strategies are most effective at protecting the unborn. And there's actually not much research done on this topic because it's very tough to get a good list of what states have passed what laws at what time. But since the only organization that really has that information is actually NARAL. They have their National Abortion Rights Action League. They actually publish a booklet called Who Decides every year, which lists every state and what sort of pro-life laws they have. And very tough to get a complete set of their booklets. Not even the Library of Congress has them. But as it turns out, they willed a lot of their archives away to a women's library at Harvard, and I was able to get access to them, and the data was right there waiting for me, and I went on to write the paper.
Huh. You're saying NARAL publishes pro-life information or pro-abortion information?
Well, they call them they call it pro-abortion information, but I call it pro-life, of course. But it talks about how different states have sort of different policies regarding abortion, and their booklets are actually very useful to me in this pro-life research.
I see. And they pretty much control a large amount of the statistics, don't they, with the Alan Guttmacher Institute?
Right, there are two basic places where you can get statistics on abortion. The Alan Guttmacher Institute is one important data source. Center for Disease Control is another. But NARAL actually indirectly does control all the data that comes out about abortion.
Is that right? I see. Very interesting. And what are the reasons for the downward trend in abortions during the 1990s?
I mean, there are a few different things. I mean, first off, there's some evidence that indicates that when the economy is doing well, the number of abortions decline, and the economy was doing better in the late 90s than the early 90s. There's some demographic factors at work, whereas people are just getting older and having fewer children, fewer pregnancies. But one thing that just cannot be denied from this research is the positive impact of state-level pro-life legislation. We saw many, many more states adopting pro-life legislation, and my research indicates pretty conclusively that this legislation has had a negative impact on the number of abortions that have occurred.
I see. For instance, we have this bill here in Massachusetts called a Woman's Right to Know Bill. How many states has that been passed in and to date, and what kind of impact has it had? Are those called informed consent or something? What are they called?
They're either called Women's Right to Know bills or informed consent bills.
What does that mean? What does that mean for
basically
people out there?
What informed consent bills do, or right to know bills do, is they provide women seeking abortions with additional information. Information about the development of their unborn child, information about public and private sources of support should they decide to keep their baby. These are the sort of information they provide. Also, health risks involved with getting an abortion. That's what these bills do. They require abortionists to give women this sort of information before they actually get an abortion.
I see. I see. And has there been any statistics regarding how much a reduction has been due to the? Is it hard to separate out a woman's right to know? As far as I've heard, anywhere from the pro-abortionists say, "Oh, that'll only impact our abortions 1 to 3%," and I've heard up to 18%. Where is there any way to statistically know with more certainty?
It's hard to say with precise accuracy what the impact is. I mean, the laws are a little bit different from state to state, and that sort of affects our ability to make real accurate judgments. My statistics probably indicate somewhere in between. I'd say between 6 and 8% is what I found. And what's actually interesting is that, even in Utah, where they first was one of the first places to have this bill, even NARAL, their own literature indicates that these laws are effective. That they actually mailed out pamphlets to about 1,000 women who basically signed up to have abortions, and about 80 or so chose not to. So 80 out of 1,000 is about 8%, and my statistical research shows it's about the case between 6 and 8% abortion reduction when these laws are passed.
I see. And now I know your research. You mentioned to me that your research was really about the 1990s. Do we know anything for the first 4 or 5 years of this decade? What's going on?
Unfortunately, there's a lag between the time a year ends and between the time the government or the Alan Guttmacher Institute releases abortion data. So my data set went up to 1999, and I don't really know a real whole lot of what's happened since then. However, I will say that more and more states have been passing pro-life legislation, and it would be my guess that the number of abortions has continued to decline during the 90s.
I see. I see. And how has the 1992 Supreme Court case of Casey versus Planned Parenthood of southeastern Pennsylvania, I believe, how has the decision and its doctrine of undue burden impact state legislatures?
True. Basically, the Casey decision was disappointing to the pro-life movement because many people thought the Supreme Court would use this as an opportunity to overturn Roe v. Wade, and they did not. However, it did give pro-life activists at the state level a little more opportunity to enact legislation that would protect the unborn. Prior to Casey, under Roe, the only kinds of legislation that consistently withstood constitutional scrutiny were parental involvement laws, like parental consent or parental notification laws, and restrictions on public funding of abortions. After Casey, there's a little more people. The states could do more things.